I spent most of the day with Andrew, wasting time with video games. His sister was also home, but we didn't have any contact with her the entire time. Andrew explained that his sister was extremely introverted lately and that she barely spoke to him, let alone strangers. In a way, I felt relieved that I didn't have the pressure of not knowing what my father would do next on my shoulders. It was the first time in years that I didn't feel a pair of someone's eyes watch me from the shadows, ready to pop out of nowhere and start screaming about how immoral of a person I was, and how whatever figure his new cult was worshipping was gonna torture me until the end of time. Later in the day, Andrew's family also showed up and asked me to explain the situation in more detail, which I did. I reaffirmed that I'd stay for a few days when Andrew's father asked me to. He was a tall, heavily built, and, as far as I knew, ex-military, so I didn't exactly want to refuse him more than once before complying. Since the whole family was at home, I was invited to have dinner with them, where I also met Andrew's younger sister, Anna. She barely talked during the entire time and gave me some weird stares which made me anxious at times, but I decided to brush it off and blame it on the angsty teenager phase and enjoy dinner together with Andrew and his parents. "You want to go out a bit and walk around the neighborhood for a while? I need some air," Andrew asked once we had finished eating. I accepted his proposal, as I could have used an evening walk to piece together what had happened in the past 24 hours and make a plan for the following few days. "Do you guys mind if I join?" Andrew's sister interrupted us. "Look who's decided to go out of the house for a change." Andrew teased her, and Anna rolled her eyes as a response. "Yeah, feel free to join," he continued. I rummaged through my backpack for some clean clothes, got changed, and left the house with them. The chilly September breeze felt refreshing after spending so much time in Andrew's house, which was slightly overheated. The neighborhood was quiet and we were just slowly walking on the empty roads without talking too much. Andrew was walking along my side, but Anna kept lagging behind due to constantly staring at her phone. He kept insisting that she should shut down her phone for a few moments and talk to us, but she didn't seem to budge. Andrew soon gave up and we just continued going as it was getting darker and darker. We stopped in a park we found along the way and sat on a bench. Andrew opened the backpack he'd taken with him and took out 3 cans of beer. He offered me one and I gladly accepted, then turned towards his sister and waved the can towards her, but she shook her head and he put the can back into his backpack. We cracked open the cans, got comfortable on the bench, and took a few sips. "Damn, haven't had one of those in a while, with my father and all." "Thanks," I said, and Andrew smiled. I stared at the beer can for a few seconds and noticed a weird noise in the background. The neighborhood had been dead quiet for the entire walk, but I could hear the distinct noise of tires screeching in the distance. "What's going on?" I asked and pointed in the direction of the sound. "Oh, it's nothing. Probably just some high school kids showing off their tuned beaters," Andrew replied and laughed. The sound was getting louder as the seconds passed, and soon it got loud enough for us to realize that they were headed our way. We waited to see if the car would enter the street the park was on. A few moments later, a large black van entered the street in a hurry, almost drifting when it turned. The van started speeding, but just as it was passing us, the driver hit the brakes as hard as he could. I jumped from the bench, panicked, and Andrew also looked concerned. Anna was still staring at her phone and didn't seem to mind. "Come on, let's get out of here. This is creeping me out," Andrew said and took his sister by her hand. "No, it's okay, it's no prob," his sister protested, but was interrupted by a loud thud coming from the van. The side door was opened and 3 men wearing black balaclavas on their head jumped out of the van. Andrew grabbed Anna with a tight grip and we started running in the opposite direction, but it only took the 3 men a few seconds to catch up. As I was running, I felt someone grab me from behind and I fell to the ground. My hands were being held against my back and I could feel one of the men tying me up. I could see Andrew in the same situation just a few steps in front of me. We both tried to resist, but the men immobilized us too fast for us to stand a chance. I was moving my head left and right to try and see what was going on and maybe identify someone, but one of the men put a sack on my head and tied it up around my neck. Once they blindfolded me, I could feel how I was grabbed by my legs and dragged to the van. I was violently thrown inside a vehicle, and I could hear screams coming from outside. The bag on my head was blocking most of the sound, but I could make out a few words. The men who were kidnapping us seemed to be trying to force Andrew and his sister to write something, but I couldn't understand more. As I was becoming more aware of what was going on and the adrenaline rush was slowly fading away, I started to panic. Time seemed to have frozen, and I could feel my heart beating so fast that I thought my chest was inflating and was about to explode. All the worst scenarios were going through my mind, and as the seconds went on, I became more certain that I'd be cut up for my organs. A few moments later, I heard him come closer to the van, and they threw Andrew right by my side. I heard the men board the vehicle, and it started in a rush. "What the fuck is going on? Who the fuck are you?" I heard Andrew scream, but he was quickly reduced to silence by what I assumed was a kick in the stomach. "Let's give them the shot. No point in taking any risks," I heard the voice of a man. Within seconds, someone grabbed my hand firmly and started cutting my sweater with a knife. I then felt the stab of a needle and I tried to resist, but my hands were tied and whoever was holding me had a strong grip. The needle stayed in my arm for a few moments, after which it was taken away, and I could feel my arms and legs becoming numb. In what I thought was less than a minute, I had no control left over my body and my mind started to become foggy. I suddenly felt like I was tired and couldn't stop myself from fading away. I slowly started regaining my senses. I tried moving my legs and fingers and realized I was still tied up, but differently. The only thing I could tell was that I was lying on a mattress, so I imagine I had been tied up to a bed. I waited for a few minutes to build up enough courage to open my eyes. When I finally did so, I saw myself tied up tightly with some thick rope, tight enough for me to only be able to lift my head a little. I was in a small, plain room that was painted in a white that had gained a yellow tone over the course of time. Behind the bed there was a single window, and the only pieces of furniture inside were a toilet, small sink, a dresser, and a desk with a chair. The room seemed to be built exactly in the same manner as a prison cell. I started becoming restless and tried to loosen the rope by frantically moving around, but it wouldn't budge. I wanted to scream and grab the attention of someone, but my rational side knew I'd make things worse, so I refrained myself and decided to wait. After what seemed an eternity of staring at the ceiling, I was startled by the door opening. I saw a young man hold the door open for someone, and 2 other men followed. Before I could take a good look at the 2 who entered, another man entered the room. My father. I froze in shock and could only stare at him in disbelief while he was inspecting me with a wide smirk on his face. "I know you're angry, son, but it's my duty to show you the truth and show you the path," he said in a soft voice. "What path? Where the fuck am I?" I screamed. "You're going to find out at the right time. Untie him and let's give him a proper introduction." One of the men accompanying him walked towards my bed, took out a knife from his belt, and started cutting the pieces of rope one by one. I managed to get a better look at the men in the room, and they were all wearing some kind of white robes, which were all identical. My father's robes, however, seemed more special, as they were adorned with all sorts of colorful decorations. After I was finally untied, I slowly got out of the bed while my father was still staring at me. "I don't want anything to do with you. Whatever you're doing here, I'm not interested. I'm leaving," I said in a more calm tone, but the men positioned themselves in front of the door, trapping me inside. "You're in the hands of the cornucopia now. I know this is hard for you, but once you see the... Cut the bullshit! I'm getting the fuck out of here, and if you don't get out of the way right now, I'm going straight to the police once I break out of here," I shouted in a fit of rage. I could see him slowly step closer to me with the same sick smirk on his face. He stopped right in front of me and put his left arm on my shoulder and suddenly slapped me violently with his right. I lost my balance and fell to the ground. I touched my face on instinct and noticed blood coming out of my nose. I turned my head back towards him and noticed him stare at me from above with disgust. "And tell me, how do you plan on doing that?" I remained on the ground as he was going back towards the door. I suddenly started remembering the events prior to me blacking out, which only angered me more. "Where is Andrew and Anna? I get that you're trying to fuck with me, but what's your business with them?" I screamed, and he turned back towards me. "Well, Anna saw the truth some time before and wanted to help you and her brother. She knows very well that the word of Vitrus has to be spread, for his lighthouse to shine brighter," he replied with the same calm tone as before. "Ben, let him cool down until noon and then begin his initiation," he told one of the men and left the room. "Yes, Grand Priest," he replied and took a small bow. The young man and one of the other guys left alongside my father, and Ben stayed around for a few more moments. He was carrying a small plastic bag which he threw in my direction and then left the room and slammed the door behind him. I rushed towards the door, but before I could put my hand on a handle, I heard him lock it. I started punching the large wooden door as hard as I could, and I could hear my knuckles crack. I kept throwing my fists at the door for a few good minutes until I finally gave up, as the door was simply too thick and stable. I turned my back towards the inside of the room and let myself slowly collapse on the floor with my back against the door. I stared at my hands, which were now red from blood from the punching. I lifted my head and gazed for a few good minutes at the window and the thick metal bars behind it, thinking if there was any way to break free. But there was no way a person could have enough strength to even pry the bars. I finally managed to get back on my feet and headed towards the window to catch a glimpse of the surroundings. There was not much I could see, as a very tall tree was blocking most of the view, but I could figure out I was at the third or fourth floor of a building, and that there was some sort of courtyard not very far away from it. A small corner of some sort of wall was visible through the branches, but I wasn't certain of what I was seeing. I eventually stepped away from the window and started frantically moving in circles in the room, trying to stop the static in my brain and come up with a coherent plan. The room's security measures could have easily beaten a lot of prisons, so I decided to make a move when that Ben was going to come back in the afternoon. As much as I tried to calm myself, I remained stirred and couldn't stay in the same position for more than a minute. I couldn't help but suggest myself that I could have somehow foreseen that my father would come after me, or that Anna was doing something suspicious, regardless of how nonsensical it was. I noticed the plastic bag that my father's henchman threw in the room and decided to take a look inside. It contained some sort of uniform with a robe, similar to what they were wearing, but its color was a deep blue. I threw it back in a corner, refusing to even think about ever getting dressed in something like that. A few hours later, when I slowly started getting used to the idea that I couldn't just peacefully walk away, I started thinking about what I could do when someone finally comes for me. Ben was quite tall and he was quite heavily built, so I had a clear disadvantage in a fight. However, randomly staring at the small desk and the wooden chair sparked an idea in my mind. I grabbed the chair, took it with me in bed, and started inspecting it. It was made out of large and heavy pieces of wood, and it was almost impossible to swing quickly. Still, I did notice that, as heavy and firm it seemed, the pieces it was made of weren't holding together particularly well. I started moving one of the chair's legs very slowly in all directions in order to rip it apart and make as little noise as possible. It was tedious, but the result satisfied me. It was heavy enough to deliver a powerful blow, but also easy to swing. I finally saw a glimmer of hope and didn't feel as doomed as I did a few hours before, even though my plan consisted of hitting the very first person who'd entered the room in the head and running out of a building I hadn't seen in my entire life.